Islamophobia is a prevalent concept in the world today, causing controversy and political polarization. But is Islamophobia justified? Is Islam a religion of peace? To break this down in an unbiased manner, we have to focus on two fundamental questions. What does the Quran actually say? And what are the social demographics of Muslim majority nations? We'll start with the former. The Quran consists of teachings of Allah through the Prophet Muhammad, broken down into 114 chapters. Like the Bible, there are stories in the Quran that contain violence. The juxtaposition, however, is distinguished by specific teachings of Jesus and Muhammad. Let's start with the first example. From the Quran, chapter 2, verses 191 to 193. And kill them wherever you find them, and turn them out from there have turned you out. And disbelief is worse than killing. But if they desist, then Allah is forgiving and merciful. And fight them until there is no more disbelief and worshipping of other gods. And worship is for Allah alone. But if they cease, let there be no transgression except against wrongdoers. These verses summarize the inherent notion of the Islamic faith, which is that there is only one God to be believed in, and those who refrain to worship that God are subject to violence and death. Example 2. And fight with them until there are no more non-believers, and religion is all for Allah. Again, more references to the concept of Islam, that there is only one religion, and those who oppose it must die. Example 3. From the Quran, chapter 9, verse 29. Fight against those who do not obey Allah and do not believe in Allah or the last day, and do not forbid what has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, even if they are the people of the book, until they pay with jizya, with willing submission, and feel themselves subdued. Once more, a reference to killing non-believers. The next example has an uncomfortable reference to today's issues. Example 4, chapter 47, verse 4. When you meet the unbelievers, smite their necks. We see this every day with the beheadings being orchestrated by ISIS. This is a common occurrence, and you can actually see this type of behavior online. There are roughly 109 verses in the Quran that call for violence unto others. But there is more to the Quran than just calling for violence. How do they treat their fellow man? Muhammad tells us that women are lesser beings than men, and that they must show complete obedience to their man. They are treated subhuman, especially in Sharia law. In the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, being a woman can be extremely dangerous. Charlotte Adams greeted a friend in London and gave him a kiss on the cheek. When she left, she was stopped by Dubai police who arrested her for kissing her friend on the cheek. She spent over 20 days in jail before getting deported, and she was a foreigner, not a Muslim woman. 27-year-old Alicia Ghali was raped in the UAE by 3 men who drugged her and broke 4 of her ribs. She got treatment at the hospital and alerted the police, which was a bad mistake. It turns out that in the UAE, getting raped is the same as having an affair, which is a crime. Alicia was arrested and charged with the same crimes as her attackers. It turns out that a woman can only prove if she was raped if there are 4 adult Muslim men who witnessed the rape and testify on her behalf. Alicia spent 8 months in a Dubai prison before being released. 13-year-old Aisha Ibrahim Dulau was gang raped in Somalia because she reported her rape to the police. She was stoned to death by 50 men. They buried her in a hole with only her head above ground and proceeded to stone her to death. Sharia courts in Pakistan punish raped women by throwing them in prison. Bangladesh beat rape victims before imprisoning them. In Afghanistan, parents can honor kill their daughters if their daughters are raped. In 2014, the International Women's Group intervened after a 10-year-old girl was raped in a mosque. Their main goal was to persuade her family not to kill her. As of now, the parents have not killed their daughter. Over 200 Nigerian schoolgirls were kidnapped and sold into sex slavery by the Islamic group Boko Haram. And this is happening all over the world. Muslim men are also allowed to take sex slaves outside of their own marriage, as chapter 4, verse 24, and chapter 33, verse 50, respectively, tell us. Perhaps this is the reason why we don't see any Muslim feminists in foreign countries. Islam also teaches that punishment of gays is not only acceptable, but imperative to follow the laws of Allah. A common argument for some say that the Old Testament says homosexuality is a sin, and blacks were treated poorly when they were slaves. How is this any different? And although Old Testament conforms to Judeo-Christian dogma, the modern Christianity, or teachings from Jesus, refrain from such morally reprehensible beliefs. But what also should be noted is that this type of teaching by the Judeo-Christian belief is also not prevalent in the world today. Christianity has indeed changed and become more acceptable to these controversial topics. So, we have confirmed that the Quran does indeed preach violence unto others, as well as unequal treatment to women and gays. But what are Muslim-majority countries actually like in terms of socio-demographics? A good place to start would be looking at the Global Terrorism Index, which rates countries based on the amount of terrorism they possess. The Institute of Economics and Peace created a statistical analysis of the deaths on an annual basis. In 2015, the study showed that the majority of terrorism occurred in 5 major countries: Iraq, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Syria, which accounted for roughly 78% of all terrorism fatalities. The index places countries on an aggregate on a scale of 1 through 10, with 1 being the least affected countries of terrorism and 10 being the most effective. The 5 major countries are rated as follows: Iraq, number 10 on the scale; Afghanistan, 9.23; Nigeria, 9.21; Pakistan, 9.07; and Syria, 8.11. When we view the demographics of each individual country, we can determine the majority group. Iraq is composed of 95% Muslims, Afghanistan, 99.8% Muslims, Nigeria, about 45% Muslims with 55 roughly Christians, Pakistan, 96.4% Muslims, Syria, 90% Muslims. We can see that Nigeria is the only country in the top 5 that has a Muslim population less than 50%. But when we dive deeper into the demographics, we discover some interesting statistics. Of the 80% of terrorism cases where a perpetrator's allegiance was able to be determined, roughly 80% belonged to the Islamic terrorist group Boko Haram, and another 19% committed by Fulani militants with allegiance to Islam. Now, there can be arguments made that these terrorist groups are part of a radical view of the Quran. But those who follow Sharia law and terrorist sects like Hamas and Hezbollah claim it is peaceful Muslims who follow Islam wrongly. So based on statistical analysis from the Global Terrorism Index, as well as specific teachings of the Quran and socio-demographics of Muslim-majority nations, it could be best aptly construed that the majority of terrorism is comprised of Muslims from Muslim-majority nations. Islam may not be a religion of hate, but it's certainly not a religion of peace. I want to add one final thing. Although it can be construed, Islam is not a religion of peace, there is no doubt that a major reason Islamic terrorism is so rampant all over the world is not strictly due to their own religious doctrine, but by the detrimental, interventionalist foreign policy implemented by the last few presidents. Interventionalism and aggressive foreign policy only substantiates the insidious attacks by radical jihadis. Hopefully, we start changing the dangerous foreign policy of overthrowing governments, because it doesn't work. And I'm done.